Are you caught up with The Last of Us?
I'm like 1 or 2 episodes behind, but we've gotten to Seattle at this point.
Good. Okay. So yeah, you've seen the beautiful Capitol Hill arch, and
I was so happy to see that. Just the arch holds a special place in my heart. I was really glad that they included it.
We all know the Capitol Hill arch and the Seattle subway system under somewhere up in like Eastlake or something, and there's multiple lines.
Yeah. Well, you can get lost down there in those tunnels.
Oh, totally. Yeah. What do you hope to see in coming episodes in the post-apocalyptic Seattle of The Last of Us?
I hope to see like Jeff Bezos, like fully like shirtless, painted. You know, he's become like a cult leader in the future after the zombie apocalypse. Yeah, and he's just like he has like a knife in his teeth. Yeah, but he's still ripped the way he's ripped now.
Of course, and completely bald. Yeah. That would be amazing.
Yeah.
He could be, maybe he's the goddess that all these people worship, the scars worship. That would be amazing.
Yeah, he's final boss.
It's not time for the Last of Us Watch podcast. It's time for Sound Politics. Well, Libby, today I'm thinking about something that happened 2 weeks and 2 years ago, actually.
Okay.
Then Governor Jay Inslee announced he wouldn't run for, do you remember this? An unprecedented fourth term, right? Mm-hmm. He'd already done 3, which was the longest anyone had been in the governor's mansion in Olympia for 50 years. Libby, I have a memento of that time. I sent you a link. We were going to print it out because it is a political cartoon, and that's just always fun, but we didn't have time. Anyway.
I have it here.
Yes. So
okay.
As you can see,
it's a very large picture of Jay Inslee's head, but as an iceberg?
Yeah. So Inslee's head is a giant iceberg. And what are the words there that these boats caught in an ice floe are saying?
The ice is finally breaking up.
Right. So David Horsey, the Seattle Times cartoonist, wrote, "Politics in Washington has suddenly come out of an incumbent-induced freeze that has blocked the paths of aspiring office holders for a decade." And what he's talking about, or what he was talking about, is Inslee and several other top-level officials had been squatting at the top for a weirdly long amount of time, and that meant down the ranks, mostly Democrats who might have normally run for higher office were just chilling or maybe frozen in place. And once Inslee and a whole slew of other people announced their retirements last year, it was the beginning of, I don't know, an avalanche. Does that metaphor work?
Yeah, but a reverse avalanche because it's like people are moving upwards, right, instead of down. But yeah, last year there was a ton of movement at the top. Mike Kreidler decided not to run after 6 terms as state insurance commissioner. 2 members of Congress, a Democrat and a Republican, decided to call it quits, as well as the King County executive. Dow didn't run, a whole bunch of others. So that's a lot of open positions, a lot of opportunity.
And maybe a different metaphor would be, better here. Dominoes, because every single one of those retirements reshuffled the players down the line.
Attorney general to governor, U.S. attorney to attorney general, state senator to Congress, state representative to state senator. In some cases, one domino knocked over a few dominoes.
Right. Like when Bob Ferguson plucked a few state legislators out of their districts to run a few of his departments. We are still seeing that domino effect and will be all year because now we reach the end of the domino chain or the end for now, and at least 9 legislative seats that will hold elections this fall in Washington. That is super uncommon in an odd year in Washington. In fact, it hasn't happened in more than a decade, at least, the Secretary of State told me, perhaps longer.
So that is setting up some tantalizing and expensive showdowns, in some cases giving voters the opportunity to weigh in on Democrats' recent big policy and tax changes.
A lot sooner than they might normally. So here to play Democrat dominoes with us are Jerry Cornfield, a state government and politics reporter at the Washington State Standard. Jerry, thanks for joining us.
Oh, well, you're welcome. Thanks for inviting me.
And Sandeep Kaushik, who is a political consultant who works primarily for Democrats and also hosts Seattle Nice, another political podcast. Thank you, Sandeep.
Thanks for having me.
I wanted to have a dominoes set here, but another prop we don't have. It turns out
we're not 80.
Have either of you played dominoes before? Does anyone play dominoes anymore?
No, I don't know how you play dominoes. I don't think I've ever played dominoes.
What about you, Jerry?
It was uncool even when I was a kid.
I was homeschooled, so I did play it.
I played marbles, though. I did.
Okay. How about you, Jerry?
I didn't play dominoes. Watched lots of people playing dominoes on tables, slamming them down, making a lot of noise. It looked like fun. I just didn't know how to play.
Okay, so at least Jerry came prepped for this conversation.
There we go. Yeah, and we can't obviously, just like we didn't have a real domino set, we don't have time to talk about all 9 races that are up today. We're just going to talk about 3 of them. 3 districts in Western Washington that even if you don't live there, might tell us all something about how well the Democrats are doing running the state, or maybe how the Republicans are doing running the country. So first, the 26th District Senate seat on the Kitsap Peninsula. Let's play the domino game, starting with U.S. Representative Emily Randall. Jerry, how did she set the stage for this race? She was on last week, by the way.
Well, she left. She went up. She was part of that reverse avalanche and went up, ran for Congress when Derek Kilmer decided not to run again. And so she won a seat in the other Washington, right, and that opened up a spot in her district.
So, Jerry, to replace Representative Randall, we've got this classic Republican versus Democratic race. Democratic Senator Deb Krishna-Dawson was appointed to the seat and is endorsed by Randall. She has a seemingly strong challenger in State Representative Michelle Caldier, a Republican who won her House seat in this district by a good margin, 55% of the vote. She won last November. Well, Sandeep, let's have you weigh in here. What are you watching for in this swing district?
Yeah, I mean, it is a classic swing district, right? And this is going to be a marquee race. Look, I think the Republicans are going to go all in here because, frankly, the Republicans aren't competitive anymore in most of Western Washington. But here's one district where they have a strong candidate with, some moderate, credentials in Caldier, like someone who's not in previous races in that district for House races, they've run candidates that are much farther to the right who have kind of lost that district narrowly. But now I think they have a candidate who they think could win. And you've got a Democrat incumbent, but one who was appointed who hasn't actually run for that position before. So it's going to be a marquee kind of party-on-party battle. For sure.
Yeah. We're going to talk a lot here today about the taxes Democrats in Olympia passed this last session because, like you say, it could be a central issue in these races. The Democratic majority, they passed over $9 billion in new taxes to help fill a general fund budget gap, another $3 billion for the transportation budget. But Senator Krishna-Dawson, who is the Democrat and who was appointed to this seat, did not vote for most of these tax increases. And Jerry, I'm wondering, do you think they'll still be a big issue in this race?
Oh, yeah. I mean, just because you vote against something doesn't mean you can hide from what happened, especially when it's your party that took those actions. But I do want to go back just for a second on the landscape for this race and the other legislative races. And then Sandeep probably could weigh in too because his experience. But it's going to be a low turnout. And the people who participate in the odd-year elections are used to voting for city and county and school boards, and they're regular voters. They're going to know the Representative Caldier pretty well. She's been on the ballot 5 times, 6 times for them. They may know Krishna-Dawson a little bit because she's been on a couple ballots as a school board member, but they may be driven by local issues. And so if their school district is suffering and they're looking at maybe having voted already on a levy, that will bring the tax issue really home for them. But I don't know how much they'll relate to, say, the Tesla tax or a tax exemption bill. It'll just be the sort of larger conversation about it's getting more expensive. The Democrat majority in the legislature is to blame. And is that an argument Republicans can make? This year, they'll probably make it pretty well compared to last year. They seem to be more united and more focused on this race.
I think that's interesting you say that because, and I want to hear what Sandeep has to say, but I talked to Ben Anderstone, a kind of data analytics guy. He seems to think the Democrats are going to do actually really well because they are experiencing an enthusiasm gap with the Republicans, that it's not going to be about state issues, that it's going to be about national issues.
Trump.
Yeah, Trump. and that the Democrats will come out really hard in this odd year. The diehards, the Democrat diehards will come out to vote. But what do you think about that, Sandeep?
I think that's quite possible, right? I mean, I do think that Democratic base voters are really energized right now. They're very, very unhappy about how the Trump administration has been acting in its first few months. I think with good reason. There's a lot of crazy stuff that's coming out of the other Washington that if you're a Democrat is going to freak you out. And so that does probably translate to some extent down to this local level. But that said, I think there's going to be a ton of money that likely will flow into this race to mobilize both sides. So you were mentioning, Scott, the legislative session. It was an incredibly contentious session, right? Taxes front and center. Ended up passing a bunch of taxes, but there were other taxes proposed that were even more controversial that didn't end up passing, like the wealth tax or the payroll tax. And what the upshot of all of that is that in some sense it shattered the coalition that came together last fall to oppose the Brian Haywood conservative initiatives, the three initiatives that are on the ballot about repealing the capital gains tax or repealing the Climate Commitment Act and the cap and trade system or the
long-term care insurance,
long-term care, the public long-term care system. There was a coalition that brought together. I mean, obviously it was Democrats, but it was progressives, but it was also in large part a lot of the business community came to the tables to fight for those things, as well as big, donors, big, very, very wealthy individual donors.
Record spending.
That coalition is coming apart at the seams right now. The business community, from everyone I talk to and everything I hear, they're furious about how the tax conversation went in Olympia this time. I would not be at all surprised, even though Krishna Dasan voted against those tax bills, I would not be at all surprised if they play to try to elect Collier to send a message to Democratic leadership and to lower the margin in the Senate. Right now, I think the Democrats have a 30-19 kind of supermajority in the Senate. So anything that shrinks that maybe makes Democrats a little less ambitious, progressives a little less ambitious. So I would not be at all surprised to see this turn into a big, big proxy battle. And
even though Krishna Dasan has been allowed to duck, the
even though
gas
she
tax
didn't
and
vote
things like
for
that.
it,
Yeah,
it doesn't. To Jerry's point, it may not matter because there's a larger it becomes a proxy for a larger fight that's happening.
Let's move to a different district now. Normally, the way dominoes work in the legislature is if you have a pretty unified party, which Sandeep is suggesting is not the case. Somebody vacates, say, a legislative office for a higher one. The county party, the county council picks the appointee to fill the spot. And then that appointee is sort of the designated person.
Right.
They don't get a lot of challenge from inside the party. But a few of these races are shaping up where the Democratic appointee actually has a real challenge from another Democrat. The 48th district over on the east side, Medina, Bellevue, Redmond, maybe that's the best example of this. So we've got two Democrats running here, State Senator Vandana Slatter and Representative Amy Wallen. They were seatmates on the House side, but Slatter got the nod to fill Patty Kuderer's seat in January, and Wallen immediately said she's going to run for that fall special election. Wallen was the runner-up for that seat.
Kind of awkward. Your coworker got the promotion, and you say, "I'm going for it too."
Yeah, Jerry, how do Senator Slatter and Representative Wallen stack up on policy? What are the big differences here, even though they're both Democrats?
Well, they're both Democrats, but I think Wallen is more in the sort of a business Democrat mode. I mean, she owns a business. She's been
a dealership, a car dealership.
Yeah, she has a car dealership, and she chairs a committee and has kept some things from going through and allowed some things to go through that folks have been questioning as it relates to the business community, and they've been supportive of her. I think this is one of those races where they have their issues as Democrats, but then there's no Republican candidate. So in a district like that, where do the Republicans go? They'll make up, their regular voters. Again, it's an off-year election. They'll show up. Who do they connect with? There's another, I would say, another factor beyond policy for these two folks is just how well are they known and liked in their community, right? Because the voters some of them have marked their ballot for both of them. So now that Democrat voter has to decide, a Republican voter has to decide who they connect with just within their community. So this could boil down to a popularity contest if it's close. If Republicans participate, I would think they would find Wallen to be a more favorable choice. And to, the battle on the 26th, the business community is already behind Wallen. I mean, she raised over $300,000 before the legislative session. So they knew they wanted to get behind her early on. We're also going to see, this may be one of the cases where Governor Ferguson has to decide, does he get involved and to what degree? And then the Governor Ferguson effect is going to be kind of looming over some of these races.
And the way things are going, he might be pulling more Republican fondness than Democratic right now.
Again, we've been watching suburban voters. I don't watch them closely, but this is a good test of where suburban voters are, back to that sort of, are they fired up by Trump, or are they concerned about having to pay more for their vehicle registration fee, and then the gas tax, and then the restaurant fees, and all that, the self-storage, all those things that may affect their bottom line month to month. That will be a test. I'm
curious, Sandeep, we're talking about the east side here. We are talking about, there's a lot of tech money. I mean, Medina is in this district. Do you expect to see the tech money go for the more moderate candidate? And then where are the unions going to go for Vandana Slatter, the more progressive candidate?
Yes, I think so. Okay. I mean, look, this is a race that sort of classically, I think, captures the basic fault line within the Democratic Party itself, between its sort of progressive or left progressive wing and its more, kind of moderate or centrist, sort of more and more business friendly wing of the party. And so, again, given the contentiousness that we just experienced in the legislative session, this was already, even before that, shaping up as a kind of knockdown, drag-out fight between progressives and centrists. And that's just going to be, that fight is going to be kind of jacked up on steroids now. After this session, tech money, business money, I think there's going to be a lot of money that flows to Amy Whalen, to back Amy Whalen. And then Vandana Slatter is a progressive who voted for the taxes, right, took all those votes. And so I would be surprised if progressive labor and other big deep-pocketed players on the progressive side don't kind of step in to help fund independent expenditures for her campaign. Though, again, this is where some of the big progressive donors that in previous races have written big checks to party, caucuses and committees may not play this time, because a lot of those people are kind of tweaked about the wealth tax proposal and how progressives sort of push that. And
the Nick Hanauer crowd.
Yeah. People, I don't think it's just Nick Hanauer. Nick Hanauer was very, the Seattle venture capitalist, Nick Hanauer was very vocal about his opposition to this. He thought the wealth tax was a bad idea. But I don't think it's just Nick. From what I hear, I think it's pretty widespread in that kind of mega donor class. And so
just to be clear,
Sandeep, correct me if I am wrong, but I think they both voted for the two major pieces of the tax proposal. I think they both voted for the B&O tax increase and the retail sales tax increase, but they differed on the transportation. So the tax bill issue, again, it just this one may not play out quite as much, but to the philosophical and ideological kind of feelings of each candidate, that may be where the Democrats divide. I'll be interested to see if they're so fired up in this district as they might be, say, in the 26th, where the Republicans do have elected office holders, how that plays out.
From what I'm hearing, I think there's going to be a lot of money flowing into this race. And again, there's a lot of anger in these constituencies, rightly or wrongly, the business community and the donor class, about Democratic leadership in the caucuses, right? And there was also a lot of bad blood between our new governor, Bob Ferguson, and those caucuses and those leaders. It was a very, as I said, contentious backroom debate.
What I'm hearing is it sounds like it's maybe a little bit more symbolic. Senator Slatter was chosen by the leadership of the party for this seat. Wallen is a little bit of not an outsider, but not so much of an insider. And so it's, even if their votes have largely been the same, only differing a little bit, it's more about vibes.
It's sending a message.
Okay. Interesting.
I think it's interesting, too, that this is going to be an intra-Democratic Party fight where maybe the gas tax comes up again, something that you were involved in that conversation with Republicans last time around with whether the Climate Commitment Act equaled a gas tax. That was coming up again and again. So we're going to just be hearing more about gas tax into these special election races. Let's turn to South King County, everybody. Really interesting House race shaping up here. This is one also with two Democrats competing in this case for the seat vacated by Tina Orwell, who was appointed to the Senate after Karen Kaiser retired. Sometimes dominoes get tired of knocking into each other and they have to step back. They have to retire. Jerry, what's shaping up in this race?
Well, in some ways, it's the same fault lines that were just within the Democratic Party that just discussed in the 48th, because you have the appointed lawmaker Edwin Obras, and he's backed by the Democrat leaders and the caucuses, and he's running up against the Burien mayor, Kevin Schilling, who is definitely more of a moderate centrist Democrat. His top endorsements from Congressman Adam Smith, who's had his stated beefs with some of the decisions by the liberal members of his party. So you have that. Schilling has been on the ballot. He has experience. He has money. And this will be the very first campaign for Representative Edwin Obras. So it will be, I don't know it'll be very close or not. There is a Republican who entered the file to run on the last day. So having a Republican on the ballot probably helps the appointed lawmaker right now at this stage. But I just don't know how much interest there'll be in this race, and where people will be voting for. They know the locals, so it may end up being with Schilling may have the advantage there.
But Schilling's probably not happy that Republican got the filing papers in.
Well, I think it's interesting because Schilling is considered by the Seattle progressives, at least, as to be kind of a conservative Democrat, right? He pushed for a law that homeless folks in Burien can be arrested for sleeping outside, even if there are no shelters in town for them to go to. He's butted heads with the King County Sheriff's Office, right, who police Burien and declined to enforce that law. Sandeep, I'm curious, do you think this will be a race that's more biographies, like who's known? We've got the mayor of Burien. He's well known, probably better known than the sitting Democrat. Or do you think it'll be, I don't know, will the Republican pop up here? What do you see? What do you think is going on?
It's hard to know right now how it's all how the cookie's gonna crumble in this race. Though it's going to be a clearly a hard fought race. Kevin is as we mentioned, he's the mayor.
Kevin Schilling,
Kevin Schilling, right? And he's been through some contentious battles over homelessness and encampments in Burien that no doubt has raised his name ID down there.
He doesn't shy away from those.
He doesn't shy away from those. I know Kevin. I've contributed to his campaign. We're friendly. So I think he's a strong candidate, but there's going to be a lot of Democratic establishment money that's going to try to prop up Obras, the incumbent. So again, I think it's another sort of proxy battle over the direction of the Democratic Party and where we're headed, and how do we feel about business? Or are they the enemy? Are they our friend? Those are the kinds of things that are going to come into play here. Kevin's seems to be raising a fair amount of money. So we'll see how it goes. Having a Republican in the race doesn't make the pathway more complicated, right? You got to get through. Presumably, a Republican will come out of the primary.
This is not like the East Side. This is a district where Trump actually almost got. It's a working class district with a lot of immigrants who some of them voted for Trump. He cracked almost 30%, if I remember right.
Yeah, it's not Seattle. And so Seattle progressives don't like Kevin, but. He seems to have done pretty well with his own constituents in his time in Burien. So I think it's a real race, and it could again become a kind of way of sending a message to Democrats from folks who are disaffected and feel like they've gone too far in a progressive direction or too far down a pro-tax road. I think there are some differences between the House and the Senate and how they interrelated behind the scenes with the business community and folks. I think the conversations between the Senate and some of these stakeholder groups were those conversations were more contentious than they were on the House side. Even though the House and the Senate were both working towards passing the same sort of package of taxes, I think relations were a little bit better on the House side. So that may take some of the passion out of these outside stakeholders about the House race compared to, say, the 48th, the Senate race there. But we'll see.
I do want to step back because we kind of have this landscape now with these competitive races where people are going to be thinking about what happened in the legislature this last session. Democrats facing a huge budget hole had to make tough decisions about cutting services and raising revenue. They've made their choices at this point, leaning maybe heavier on revenue than some centrists and folks on the right wanted. Now, will voters punish them for it? Will they endorse the more progressive bent of the Democratic caucus? Like, that's kind of one of the big questions that these races are going to give us a sense of. But as we are talking about all of this, the legislature is waiting for Governor Ferguson to use that bill signing or bill veto pen or line item veto pen. Yeah, there's a bunch of key bills we're waiting on, including the operating budget and, the transportation budget. Ferguson has the option to reject some or part of these tax policies, which would then cause this ripple effect, including possibly a special session this summer.
Or a domino effect.
Yeah. Maybe a domino effect. Sure. Let's keep the metaphor, Scott, including possibly a special session to hammer this stuff out in the summer. Jerry, you tracked the governor down to a college in Lacey this week. I mean, what did he say about why he's waited so long and what he plans to do here?
Well, he didn't say anything about why he's waited so long or what he plans to do, which is kind of part of the problem.
Surprising,
and I mean, no governor has ever revealed to me a veto that he or she plans to make before he's telling the legislative leaders and before they announce it publicly. So I wasn't surprised that he was a little kind of coy and made clear he wants to keep people guessing. And most governors wait till the final day, which in this case is Tuesday, May 20th, to actually sign and let us all see the vetoes. So keeping it close to the vest, that doesn't surprise me. Keeping us in suspense is kind of fun to track. He knows everyone wants to know, and I've looked at dozens and dozens of the request letters for vetoes and signing that have come in, and they are from everybody at all levels of business and the community. They have a lot of beefs. They would hope that he could use his pen to act on some. I do think he will, he'll veto a couple of things. He will try to portray those, maybe a full tax bill, like what's been dubbed the Tesla tax. It doesn't bring in a ton of money, but if he vetoes that, you can say he vetoed something to not stand in the way of sales of electric vehicles, even if some will tag him with supporting the president's close advisor. But in the end, I don't think it'll be enough to really bring them back. That would be pretty risky for a first-term governor to take such action to bring the lawmakers back into special session, spend more government and public money to decide these issues. So I don't see that happening.
Sandeep, do you expect the governor to have any impact on these races with what he chooses to sign?
Potentially could. Like, I agree with Jerry. I think and I have no special insight into what the governors do. I think we're all waiting to see what he does. But I will be surprised if he wields the veto pen with such force that he's cutting big chunks of new tax revenue to the point that we have to bring legislators back for a special session. If that happens, that could be very, very, God knows what will happen, and that could have huge impacts, right, in terms of how this plays out with these races in November. I think it's pretty unlikely that he will go that far, but I also agree with Jerry. I would not be at all surprised if he picks one or two things again to kind of veto as a way of putting a marker down and saying, I'm not completely on board with the direction that the two Democratic legislative caucuses went, and he's definitely getting a lot of appeals and a lot of pressure from business and other folks, as Jerry said, asking him to take, to veto something, and so we'll see what happens. We're gonna have to wait and see what happens. But yes, could it have an impact on races depending on what he does? Absolutely.
We will watch how the chips or dominoes fall. Jerry Cornfield is a state government and politics reporter at the Washington State Standard. Sandeep Kaushik is a political consultant and the host or co-host of the Seattle Nice podcast. Thank you both for joining us.
Oh, well, you're welcome. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, and if I could shamelessly put in the last plug, and Blue City Blues, my other new.
That's right. You're also the host of Blue City Blues.
That's right.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody, for listening to Sound Politics today. I'm Libby Dankman.
And I'm Scott Greenstone. Our producer is Hans Anderson, who apologizes that he didn't print out that political cartoon. I'll lash him later. I'll grab the
responsibility?
Cat of nine tails. He said he would.
That's
he said it would be fun.
Oh,
no,
right.
I can't be trusted to
for
print
him
out.
today.
I can't be trusted to print out anything
you know
or do
what?
anything.
It's a tough time for public media, and we can't afford the ink.
We couldn't afford the ink. Yeah,
let's be honest.
And if you would like to, donate so we can afford the ink, please go to KUOW.org/politics. Donate there. We'll be back next week.